There are places on this planet that do not behave the way places are supposed to behave. Mountains striped like a painter's spilled palette, villages carved into stone cones that look like something left behind by a civilization that no longer exists. Forests that grew underwater and never fell down. Lakes that change color on their own, with no one watching, for reasons no one can fully agree on. We tend to think we understand the world we live on. We have satellites mapping every coastline, drones photographing every ridge, databases cataloging every species. And yet, scattered across the continents, there are locations so strange, so quietly impossible, that standing in front of them makes something in your mind hesitate. Tonight, we are going to 14 of them. A village in Iran where people still live inside rock that was never meant to hold a home. A temple in India carved downward from the top of a mountain into its heart, by hand. A drowned forest in Kazakhstan where dead trees still stand like white spears rising out of turquoise water. Mountains in China painted in colors that geology says should not be possible. And a village in China where an entire town vanished under a blanket of green. By the end, you may find that a few things you assumed about the surface of the earth were never quite true. These are places so strange, they will make you doubt everything you think you know. Number 14. Kandavan, Iran. Our first stop is a village that looks less like a settlement and more like a coral reef that learned to grow on land. Kandavan, in the northwest of Iran, in the province of East Azerbaijan, sits on the slopes below Mount Sahand, a volcano that stopped erupting hundreds of thousands of years ago. When that volcano was still alive, it buried this valley in thick layers of ash and debris. Over the centuries, wind and water carved that compacted ash into a forest of cones, tall, tapered, pale spires rising out of the hillside. Geologists call them Karen, which loosely means beehive. And the people who arrived here, roughly 700 years ago, looked at these strange stone cones and did something extraordinary. They moved in. They hollowed out the interiors, room by room, floor by floor. A single cone might contain 2, 3, even 4 stories, with a stable at the bottom, living quarters in the middle, and storage near the top where the rising heat keeps food dry. The rock itself is a natural insulator, keeping the homes cool in summer and holding warmth through the mountain winters. Some of these carved homes have been continuously lived in for centuries, passed down through generations. Roughly 600 people still call Kandavan home today. They have running water, electricity, satellite dishes, bolted to the outside of stone that predates most of the world's nations. Would you sleep soundly inside a cone of volcanic ash, knowing the walls around you were shaped not by an architect, but by an eruption? Number 13. Ellora Caves, India. From a village that grew inside the rock, we travel to a place where humans did the opposite. They attacked the rock and pulled a cathedral out of it. The Ellora Caves, in the state of Maharashtra in western India, are a complex of 34 monasteries and temples stretching along a 2-kilometer wall of basalt cliff. They were carved between roughly the 6th and 10th centuries. But it is one structure in particular, Cave 16, that stops people in their tracks. It is called the Kailasa Temple, and it was not built, it was excavated. Instead of stacking stone to raise a temple upward, the ancient builders started at the top of the cliff and carved downward, removing an estimated 200,000 tons of solid rock to reveal a full-sized temple hiding inside the mountain. Courtyards, columns, life-sized elephants, multi-story galleries, all of it cut from a single continuous piece of stone. There are no joints, no bricks, no seams. It is one enormous sculpture in the shape of a building. Modern engineers have studied it and struggled to explain how it was done with such precision, with no ability to correct a mistake, because once you cut too deep into solid rock, there is no putting it back. The scale of ambition here is almost unsettling. Somebody stood on top of a mountain 1,200 years ago and decided to carve a temple out of the entire thing, downward, in the dark, and got it right. Number 12. Dargavs, Russia. Now we go somewhere much quieter and much stranger. In the mountains of North Ossetia, in southern Russia, near the village of Dargavs, there is a slope covered in small stone buildings with pale, pointed roofs. From a distance, in the fog that often wraps these highlands, it looks like a charming little town. Approach it, and you understand why locals for centuries were reluctant to go near it. Nobody lives here. Nobody ever did. This is the city of the dead. There are around 99 crypts scattered across the hillside, built between roughly the 16th and 18th centuries. The families of this valley use them as tombs, placing their dead inside, sometimes in wooden boat-shaped vessels, along with their belongings. The dry mountain wind and the design of the crypts naturally mummified the bodies, preserving them for centuries. Some crypts still contain skeletal remains visible through the small window-like openings. Local legend claims that anyone who came here to explore out of mere curiosity would not leave alive. That is folklore, of course, but there is a darker thread of truth beneath it. During a devastating plague that swept the region, some families are said to have quarantined themselves in these crypts, entering while still alive, to die apart from the healthy and avoid spreading the sickness. A city built by the living, for the dead, and occasionally lived in by the dying. Number 11. Houtouwan, China. From a town that was always meant to be empty, we come to one that emptied out on its own, and then disappeared under a wave of green. Houtouwan is a former fishing village on Shengshan Island, part of the Shaanxi archipelago off the eastern coast of China. Decades ago, this was a thriving community, home to more than 2,000 people who made their living from the sea. But the village was remote. Access was difficult. Deliveries of food and supplies were unreliable, and the nearby city offered better schools and better work. Through the 1990s, families left, one by one. By the early 2000s, Houtouwan was almost completely abandoned. And then nature did what nature does when we look away. A fast-growing ivy crept up from the ground and swallowed the village whole. Today, entire houses are wrapped in a dense green skin of vegetation. Walls, roofs, windows, doorways, all vanished beneath thick curtains of leaves. From the hillside above, the town looks less like ruins and more like a range of soft green hills, with the faint geometry of buildings hidden underneath. It has become one of the most photographed abandoned places on Earth, a preview of what our world might look like if humanity ever stepped aside. It is beautiful. It is also a strange kind of warning. We think of our towns as permanent. Houtouwan disappeared in a single generation. Number 10. Oradour-sur-Glane, France. Our next place is preserved for the opposite reason. It was not reclaimed by nature. It was frozen in time on purpose, as a wound that a nation refuses to let heal. Oradour-sur-Glane, in west-central France, is a village that ended on a single afternoon, the 10th of June, 1944. 4 days after the D-Day landings, a company of Waffen-SS soldiers entered the town. Over the course of a few hours, they murdered 642 people. Men, women, and children, nearly the entire population. The men were taken to barns and shot. The women and children were locked inside the village church, which was then set aflame. Almost no one survived. After the war, the French government made a decision. The ruined village would never be rebuilt. It would be left exactly as it was found, as a permanent memorial, and so it still stands today. The blackened shells of houses, the rusted frame of a sewing machine, a car left in the street since 1944, tram lines that lead nowhere, signs on the crumbling walls that simply say, "Remember." You can walk its silent streets, and the strangeness is not visual, it is emotional. Everything is intact enough to feel like a living town, and empty enough to feel like the moment right after everyone left. Time simply stopped here, and was ordered never to start again. Number 9. Lake Kaindy, Kazakhstan. From a place preserved by grief, we return to the pure strangeness of nature. And one of the most surreal sights in all of Central Asia. Lake Kaindy, in the mountains of southeastern Kazakhstan, is barely more than a century old, and it was born from a catastrophe. In 1911, a massive earthquake shook the region, triggering an enormous landslide that tumbled down the mountainside and dammed a gorge. Water from the melting snow slowly filled the valley behind that natural dam, and a lake was created where a forest used to stand. The trees drowned, but they did not fall. To this day, the bare, sun-bleached trunks of the submerged spruce forest rise straight up out of the water, like a field of pale spears piercing the surface. The lake's water is cold and remarkably clear, tinted a striking blue-green by the minerals washed down from the surrounding limestone. Look beneath the surface on a calm day, and you can see the rest of those trees still standing on the lake bed, their branches preserved by the icy water, an entire forest frozen in a moment that happened over 100 years ago. Above the waterline, they look dead and skeletal. Below it, they look almost alive. It is a forest and a lake occupying the same space at the same time, and it should not exist. An earthquake made it in an afternoon. Number 8. Mount Kelimutu, Indonesia. If a drowned forest bends your sense of what is possible, our next place will do the same to your sense of color. On the island of Flores in Indonesia stands a volcano called Mount Kelimutu, and at its summit sit 3 crater lakes. That alone is not so unusual. What is unusual is this: the 3 lakes are routinely different colors from one another, and each of them changes color independently over time. One lake might be a deep turquoise, another a rich red or brown, a third black as ink. Then, over months or years, they shift. The turquoise turns green, the black turns red. The colors rearrange themselves like a slow, silent code. For generations, the local people believed these lakes were the resting places of departed souls, sorted by age and by the nature of the life they had led. One lake for the young, one for the wise, one for the wicked. Science offers a different explanation. The colors come from volcanic gases rising up through the water and reacting with the minerals in each lake, changing their chemistry and therefore their color. But here is the strange part. The 3 lakes sit almost side by side, on the same mountain, fed by the same volcano, and yet they behave completely differently, on their own schedules, for reasons that even now are not fully predictable. Scientists can explain the chemistry, they cannot always tell you which color will come next. Number 7. Zhangye, Danxia, China. Now to China, and a landscape that looks less like geology and more like an accident in a paint factory. In the province of Gansu lies the Zhangye Danxia Formation, a stretch of hills and ridges banded in stripes of red, orange, gold, green, and blue. From a distance, the mountains appear to have been draped in fabric or painted in layers by a giant hand, except no one painted them. These colors are the honest, unedited surface of the rock. The story behind them is a story of deep time. Over roughly 24 million years, layer after layer of red sandstone and mineral-rich sediment was laid down here, one band at a time, each with its own distinct color, determined by the metals it contained: iron oxides for the reds and oranges, other trace minerals for the greens and blues. Then the tectonic forces that raised the Himalayas tilted and folded these flat layers, standing them up at dramatic angles. And finally, wind and rain wore away the softer rock and exposed the striped cross-sections we see today. Every color is a chapter of the Earth's history, stacked in order and then turned on its side so we can read it. On a clear day after rain, when the colors are at their most vivid, people standing in front of these hills genuinely doubt they are looking at something natural. They are. Number 6. Chocolate Hills, Philippines. From painted mountains, we go to hills that look like they were arranged by hand. 1,000 of them, nearly identical, scattered across an island as if by design. The Chocolate Hills of Bohol, in the Philippines, are a field of more than 1,200 dome-shaped hills spread across an area of about 50 square kilometers. They are astonishingly uniform, rounded and symmetrical, ranging from about 30 to 120 meters tall. In the rainy season, they are covered in green grass. But in the dry months, that grass turns brown, and the hills take on the color of chocolate, which is how they earned their name and their eerie reputation. The strangeness is in the regularity. Nature is usually chaotic. Coastlines are jagged, mountains are irregular, forests are messy. But here, across an entire landscape, are hundreds of hills that look like they were poured from the same mold. Geologists believe they are the eroded remains of ancient marine limestone, shaped over millions of years by rainwater and the slow dissolving of stone. Local legends tell far better stories, of two giants who hurled boulders at each other for days, or of a giant who wept for a lost love, his tears hardening into these hills. Standing among them, watching 1,000 identical mounds roll toward the horizon, it is easy to understand why people reached for myth. The truth that water and time can produce something this orderly is almost harder to believe. Number 5. Yakushima Forest, Japan. Our next place trades order for age, an old, mossy, primeval forest that feels less like a location and more like a memory of an older world. Yakushima is a small, mountainous island off the southern coast of Japan, and it is soaked in rain. Some parts receive several meters of it every year. That constant moisture has created a forest unlike almost anywhere else. Deep green, dripping, carpeted in more than 600 species of moss, with mist curling between ancient cedar trees. The light here is dim and green, filtered through layers of canopy and fog. At the heart of this forest grow the yakusugi, the island's ancient cedars, some of which are thousands of years old. The most famous, known as Jomonsugi, is estimated to be at least 2,000 years old, and by some accounts far older than that. Potentially among the oldest living things in the country. To stand beside a tree that was already ancient when empires rose and fell is a humbling, almost disorienting experience. This forest was so atmospheric that it helped inspire the dreamlike woodland of a beloved animated film, and visitors often describe the same feeling, that they have stepped out of the present day and into something timeless. It is a place where the trees are older than recorded history, and the whole forest seems to be quietly watching you pass through. Number 4. Skeleton Coast, Namibia. From a forest that feels alive, we go to a coast that feels like the end of the world. The Skeleton Coast runs along the northern shore of Namibia, where one of the oldest and driest deserts on the planet meets the cold, violent waters of the Atlantic. The local San people called it the land God made in anger. Portuguese sailors gave it a grimmer name, the Gates of Hell. The reason is written all along the sand. This coastline is littered with the bones of ships. Hundreds of wrecks, some centuries old, half buried in the dunes, their rusted hulls slowly being consumed by the desert. And scattered among them are the bleached bones of whales and seals, remnants of the old whaling era, giving the coast its haunting name. What makes this place so deadly is the collision of forces. A thick, cold fog rolls in off the ocean, blinding ships and disorienting sailors. Powerful currents and hidden sandbanks drag vessels aground. And once you are shipwrecked here, survival means crossing one of the harshest deserts on Earth, with no fresh water for hundreds of kilometers. Many sailors who survived the wreck did not survive the shore. And yet, life persists. Vast colonies of seals gather here, desert-adapted lions and elephants roam the interior, and the fog itself delivers just enough moisture to sustain a strange, hardy ecosystem. It is a place of death and endurance in the same breath, where the desert and the ocean are slowly, patiently, swallowing the evidence of everyone who ever tried to pass through. Number 3. Angel Falls, Venezuela. Now we lift our eyes upward to the tallest uninterrupted waterfall on the planet. Deep in the remote jungle of southeastern Venezuela, water plunges from the edge of a flat-topped mountain and falls for 979 meters, over 3,200 feet, before reaching the world below. This is Angel Falls. It is so tall that during the dry season, much of the water evaporates or is blown away as mist long before it ever hits the ground, dissolving into cloud in mid-air. The falls tumble from the summit of Aoyan Tepui, one of the region's tepuis, enormous flat-topped mountains with sheer vertical cliffs, standing like islands high above the surrounding rainforest. These tabletop mountains are among the oldest rock formations on Earth, and because their summits have been isolated for so long, cut off from the world below by kilometer-high walls, they have become sanctuaries for plants and creatures found nowhere else, entire ecosystems evolving alone at the top of the sky. It is a landscape so otherworldly that it inspired stories of lost worlds where prehistoric life still survived. For centuries, the only people who knew of the falls were the indigenous Pimon. To the outside world, they remained hidden until the 20th century, tucked away in one of the most inaccessible corners of the continent. A river that falls from the top of a mountain so tall it becomes rain before it lands. Number 2. Fiordland, New Zealand. From the top of the world, we descend to the bottom of a valley carved by ice, in one of the wettest, most dramatic landscapes on Earth. Fiordland lies in the southwestern corner of New Zealand's South Island, a vast wilderness of steep-walled fjords, dark lakes, and mountains that rise almost vertically from the sea. During the last ice ages, colossal glaciers ground their way through this land, gouging out deep U-shaped valleys. When the ice retreated and the sea rushed in, those valleys flooded, creating the fjords, narrow arms of ocean reaching far inland, walled in by cliffs that soar over a kilometer straight up. The most famous of these, Milford Sound, is regularly called one of the most beautiful places on the planet, and one of the rainiest. Some parts of Fiordland receive over 7 meters of rain in a year, but that rain is part of the magic. After a heavy downpour, hundreds of temporary waterfalls burst into life down the sheer cliff faces, streaming from the mist-shrouded heights into the dark water below. The scale here defies the eye. Peaks vanish into cloud. Waterfalls fall so far they seem to move in slow motion, and beneath the surface, the mix of fresh rainwater and seawater creates conditions so unusual that deep-sea creatures live in surprisingly shallow water. It is a place that makes a human being feel very small and very temporary, standing at the bottom of a valley that ice spent millions of years carving. Number 1. Blue Grotto, Italy. For our final place, we go inside a mountain, into a hidden chamber where the sea itself begins to glow. On the coast of the island of Capri, in southern Italy, there is a sea cave called the Grotta Azzurra, the Blue Grotto. Its entrance is so low that visitors must lie flat in a small rowboat and let the boatman pull them through the narrow opening, timed carefully between the swells. And then, in the darkness inside, something remarkable happens. The water begins to shine, not reflect. Shine, an intense, luminous, electric blue that seems to rise up from beneath the surface and fill the entire cavern with light. The effect is not magic, though it looks like it. There is a second opening, a larger gap in the rock hidden just beneath the waterline. Sunlight passes through that submerged opening, travels through the seawater, and enters the cave from below. The water filters out the reds and warmer colors, allowing only the blue light to pass through, and that blue light illuminates the whole chamber from underneath, making the water itself appear to be the source of the glow. Objects held beneath the surface take on a haunting silver shimmer. The ancient Romans knew about this cave. The Emperor Tiberius, who ruled from Capri, is believed to have used it as a private swimming grotto, decorated with statues, some of which have since been recovered from the seabed. For a while, local superstition held that the cave was haunted, home to spirits and monsters, and people avoided it. Now we understand the physics, but understanding the physics does not make it any less astonishing to sit in a small boat, in the dark, inside a mountain, and watch the water catch fire in blue. 14 places. A village grown inside volcanic cones, and a temple carved down out of solid rock. A city built for the dead, and a town swallowed by the living green. A village frozen in the grief of a single afternoon, and a forest drowned in a single earthquake. 3 lakes that change color in secret, mountains striped like a rainbow, 1,000 identical hills, an ancient forest older than history, a coast made of bones, a waterfall that turns to rain in the sky, fjords carved by vanished ice, and a cave where the sea glows blue. We like to believe we have the earth figured out, measured, mapped, explained. And in a sense, we do. There is a scientific answer for almost everything you have just seen. But the answers do not make these places any less strange. Knowing how the Rainbow Mountains formed does not stop your mind from insisting they cannot be real. Knowing the physics of the Blue Grotto does not make the glowing water any less impossible to accept. That is the quiet lesson of places like these. The world is stranger than our certainty about it. The map may be finished, but the territory still has the power to stop you in your tracks and make you doubt what you thought you knew. If one of these places lodged itself in your mind, keep it there. Better yet, go and stand in front of it one day and let it do its work. Because the surface of this planet is still full of things that look impossible, right up until the moment you are standing before them. And sometimes even then.